I wanted to dive into was, we talked a little bit about the pandemic. So how has these issues, loneliness, like obviously we've seen that they've risen through the pandemic, and what is the changes you've seen happen during the pandemic, and how have things changed? Yeah.
Okay. So a little bit of what you said, even in the US and the wisdom of trauma, we did see many individuals who did undergo trauma, right? The way they coped was through drugs, through alcohol, so on and so forth. So that's your coping coming in, your negative coping, so to speak. So again, it depends on the individual, because there are individuals who go through absolute trauma and then they don't get into drugs or other substance abuse. But then again, everyone's not the same. There are individual differences. So it's your perception and how you deal with it, which is your secondary appraisal, coping, that comes into play. So I would say that, again, isolation is a way of coping. So we did see a lot of women isolating themselves. So even within being socially isolated, because of the domestic violence that was going on, they were further isolating themselves and their children in rooms. So which is very bad for the child as well, because let's not forget that, children develop, that developmental phase happens in your first 5 to 10 years of life. So that has a big consequence. So that's one area. And then we did have individuals who potentially were stressed about losing their jobs, or they lost their jobs. So some of them, okay, they were resilient and they found different means to work, to kind of financially sustain themselves, whilst others, in order to cope, they started, using substances. So it could be alcohol to prescription drugs to other drugs like cocaine, so on and so forth, because they had access, right? So again comes that income, the income source there. So the ones who could afford it, right? It was, so you see two trends there, because you have those who could afford it and those who could not afford it. So there was a positive aspect where the ones who could not afford it went into kind of, because there was lack of choice, they did go into kind of sobering, unwillingly. And you did see a rise in addiction with those who could afford. So you saw a lot of people who did not take substances or used it for recreational purposes, actually using it as a coping mechanism. So you learn through association and reward. And there was a lot of the instrumental learning happening, because that was their getaway, kind of escape mode. So, it's that reward and punishment. There was more of reward having that substance or whatever, alcohol. So you saw rising levels of alcohol abuse or any other drug abuse. And then the consequences again was that if they were prone to be an offender, so to speak, or already offending by, physically or verbally or emotionally or sexually violating the rights of their partner, you saw that rising. Right? Yeah, and a lot of, again, this is a cultural dynamic and a societal norm. They think that because you're married, you cannot say no to your husband. You definitely can say no, it's called marital rape, right? And when it's no, it's no. But, we saw rising levels of marital rape.
Yeah.
And obviously physical beating as well. And it was quite bad. So it's not only the partner, but also the child. Because of course you're in your house, so that's the only thing you see. And it's now been 2 years. And I would like to highlight some also the moment, and those who can get access, right? Even if it's the village, they did have access to, different types of substances. What happened was they find means to get it, right? And then they beat their wife, they beat their children, or the children witness it, which hinders their development. And of course, if your mom or your dad or your parents are unhappy, it's contagious. Children feel it, right? They're in constant terror. And that's bad again. And a lot of women don't leave. And you could ask me why. I think that's another theme there. And it's sad, I would say. And there's that one area where there was a time where they did lift the curfew and where things came back to normal. And then we did see the men rushing to get their bottles of alcohol, so on and so forth, stack it up. And again, we had a surge in violence. And you may know that it was so bad that there were women who actually took the lives of their husband. So, I mean, they did, they were beaten up, and for their own safety, it was self-defense. So you saw a rising levels of murder there as well.
So it's actually highlighting so many issues, almost like right from where we started the conversation, when we talked about community-based society to individualistic society. What we see is that, in a community-based society, even when there's stress, the stress is almost shared, or there's like a community aspect to it. And so it doesn't peak as much as it would when you're isolated in your own household, where you're just seeing the same person, and the violence keeps growing. Because if you're going to hit your wife is also angry, your child is angry, and then that's coming back to you. Like it's just basically, more, it's just giving birth to more and more violence in different forms. And then even from what we learned about trauma in the film Wisdom of Trauma, you can see that children, when they're witnessing this, trauma is intergenerational. So then they are more likely to imitate or unconsciously mimic these behaviors when they go into stressful situations later on with their intimate partner. So then it becomes generational, and it's affecting generations.
It's passed down generationally. So the lady who spoke of who was kidnapped, she mentions how her mom was potentially was abused when she was young. So it's definitely passed on because that's the only thing they know, right? So it's you learn it and then you pass it down to your potentially your kids as well.
Yeah, and then another thing which I've learned about abuse is that abuse is like, if the man of the household is stressed, then he will pass it to his wife because she is next in line. And then when the wife is stressed, she will pass it to her children. So it happens that way as well. And so, the cycle. And then at the end of the day, it's the children which are really facing the brunt of it in very different ways.
And you did highlight the aspect of community, but I would like to highlight also that although Sri Lanka is kind of a very community, social, socially and culturally kind of knitted community, when it comes to problems regarding mental health, when it comes to problems regarding, your family dynamics, there's also a little bit of resistance there in voicing these out, right? So they like to keep it hidden, simply because of shame. And, they're afraid that other individuals or other families would get to know this. It'll leak out into the community, and then what would the community think of this? So you get your mother-in-law, your brother-in-law, your father-in-law trying to cover the whole thing up. And the system, there's a lot of structural stigma as well there, because the systems aren't supportive enough to help these individuals to actually come out of it. So, it's the structural stigma prevents persons living in these situations to actually reach out for help, because they know that the moment they do reach out for help, then all you need is a connection, and it comes back to your household, and then you're in more danger, even more.
Because the perpetrator has been told that this is what's,
Yes, and that's really scary, because there are instances where it has happened and it has led to more violence, right? And sometimes they go unreported, and sometimes it's reported as, homicide, or not reported at all, or missing. So those are like some of the scary, these are real issues, and I think we should actually talk about them, because the more you put people and encourage them to go back to a perpetrator, right, and it's unreported, for the sake of the family or saving face, you're putting another individual at risk, and you're putting your child at risk as well, especially if it is not reported.
Yeah. So it's almost like first it takes a lot of courage to report, and then those structures aren't in place. And I guess that would be the next theme. But there was another thing I wanted to just touch upon before we move there, is belittling women, sexual violence against women. So at least as someone who's come from India, what I've seen is that the sexual harassment in transport and just the day-to-day violence which I've seen, women go through is a lot higher than I've seen in India or UK or US, especially like on transport and all. So it's almost like there are two things. One is that there are a lot of young men who have all this extra energy which they aren't able to utilize, and I felt like that was something touched upon in your previous video as well. And then the second thing is that as a society, sexual violence or sexual harassment on public transport, or even belittling women, is not seen as something to be stopped by bystanders, for instance. So the bystanders usually just ignore it, or they don't. So what is the role that bystanders are playing, and why is it that people look at it and they just let it happen?
Okay, so I think it's more of, there could be, it depends, of course, it depends on the circumstance. And I think, again, there's a lot of, I don't want to get involved in this going on. It's just another thing, it's normal. They've normalized this, where it's accepted socially that it's okay to belittle a woman. It's okay to kind of harass a girl on public transport, and it's not. So nobody's speaking about it. So it's not going to stop, because it's known to be accepted and normalized. So I think we need to, again, that generational aspect comes into play, because if it's normalized, and like I said, I would boil down to a lot of strata demographies coming in as well. So if for example, your child, if your mom is not present, right, and is out of the country, then these children then who are neglected, they learn by modeling others, right? They look at other people if they're neglected, and that's how they learn. So if they've learned through behavior, or if they're modeling others, this is one way that it will continue to go on, right? That's one aspect. The other aspect is nobody's challenging these, unchallenged norms that are normalized, right? Which I think, which should be challenged, in my opinion, because it's not okay. Any form of, whether it's verbal, whether it's emotional, it's not okay. And I would say the third aspect, why nobody's doing anything about it. I don't know if you're aware, in Philadelphia, I think it was a month ago, there was a girl who was raped in a train, and there were over, I think, 50 people who were in that, or more, in that train.
Oh, really? I didn't know about that. That is shocking.
And
yeah,
it's shocking. It's shocking, and this is in the US, right?
Yeah.
And nobody did anything about it.
Really? Wow.
No. They took their phones out and they were videoing the whole thing. No one dared to call 911, right? So, I mean, I would boil that down to group. Well, definitely there's groupthink there. You think that, somebody would do something about it. And so there's a group there who thinks that, okay, the other person will call 911, or the other person will call the but nobody does, right? That's one way of, kind of trying to rationalize why people don't do anything about it. But then another way is like, why would you take your phone and video the thing? Take your phone and call somebody, the authorities. So it's very difficult to kind of understand why society has become the way that, it has, but it's shocking, right? So there are programs in Sri Lanka in place, but when women do, so the constant complaint then is, okay, then why don't women take the responsibility and move out and kind of get the help they need? Why aren't they seeking this type of behavior? So the help-seeking behavior. Well, when they do seek help, right, they're constantly asked to go back to their home to save face, right? So these are by maybe the police, maybe the mental health nurses who are examining individuals who are bruised and battered. So there's something definitely wrong in the system then. So if there aren't any policies, there may be programs in paper, right? But if there aren't policies and practices that are there and implementation of it, right? What's the point? So I feel that there needs to be a policy change, right? And there needs to be active, the law needs to take it very seriously, because in Sri Lanka, the law is very archaic, right? It's very old. You cannot divorce under, I think it's under 3 conditions, where there's malicious desertion. I think the spouse needs to kind of cheat. It's absurd. So we need to, if the law is archaic, then we need to kind of set new policies and new rules to protect everyone.